Today, our guest is Mitch Azaria. Mitch has had a long career in broadcasting. In 1982, he started as a reporter and anchorman for Global Television. And then 12 years later, he moved on to Good Earth Productions. He formed the company, and since that time, this independent company has done over how many documentaries now? Over 200, I believe.
It's a lot. That's a big number, right?
It's a big number. It's a big number. And Good Earth Productions has done some tremendous work over the past number of years. They've won numerous awards. They won one of the prestigious Hot Doc Awards and 8 Gemini nominations. And their first series, The Great Canadian Parks, was Discovery Channel's top-rated prime time series. Tremendous series. Now, more recent programs, and of course, we're all familiar with the TVO series, and we've been on trips on the Rideau Canal, the Niagara, and the Bruce. And now we're going to take a trip on Train 185. Mitch, thanks for joining us today. It's good to talk to you again.
Always fun to be with you, Mike.
Thanks very much. Now, this production will be premiering on TVO and TVO.org and YouTube TVO on April 7th. And this is a really different kind of journey. It's a train journey, obviously. And we travel from Sudbury to White River on a rail diesel car. Maybe you could start by telling us, what is a rail diesel car?
Yeah, and that I'm glad we start off with that, because it's almost more like a bus than it is a train. But I'll back up the story a little bit. So after the Second World War, cars were plentiful. Buses were becoming popular. Plane travel was becoming a little more common, and the rail industry was suffering. So they were trying to figure out a way to kind of combat that. And a lot of their little spur lines, that they just couldn't support anymore, because you have a locomotive and you have, a lot of crew to support the train, sets of 3 or 4 or 5. This company called Budd of Philadelphia developed a train that was, as I said, kind of a bus. It was self-contained. It had 2 diesel engines in it. One person could operate it. They could, drive from the front. It had disc brakes. It had a passenger compartment, a baggage compartment. So everything was in one, like a bus, one set. And it really revolutionized and brought back a lot of these small, rail lines. And they made about 400 of them, and they were greatly popular. CN, bought a few, CP bought a few. But the one we're on is the last remaining Budd car set in North America that still operates, and it's just a classic, beautiful train.
And I'm wondering why the trip from Sudbury to White River was so important as it is, and what led you to develop a documentary around that trip.
Yeah, because you've sort of followed our antics. We're always looking in Ontario for interesting trips, and it was always in the back of our mind to do a train. But when the pandemic was on, travel wasn't allowed, and we'd been told that the Polar Bear Express was an incredible train ride, and we went up there and scouted that, and it was nice, but it was kind of like this tunnel, and you couldn't kind of get a good look at at much on either side. And then somebody, I think it was Daryl Adair, told us about this train. We'd never even, heard of it. So we went up to Sudbury and we got on the train, and we rode it. And immediately we knew this was going to be a great program, not just because the scenery is terrific, not because it's one of the, historic and last trains in North America, but the relationships between the crew and the passengers and the riders. Because it's an essential train. If this train doesn't run, there's communities, lodges, cabins that are, will just disappear. This is an essential service for those, for those people. So, this great relationship between, the via, train crews and the people along the line is I think that's the best part of the story. we were going along at one point and the train starts to slow down and I'm in the passenger compartment. It stops. The door opens on the passenger compartment and this young 20-something, all Canadian young woman lifts up this beautifully baked pie to the crew and says, "Hey guys, I was thinking about you yesterday, so I made this for you." And she had just flagged down the train, and it stopped and they thought she was getting on, but she just wanted to give them a pie. And that's the other beautiful thing. It's a flag stop train, so it'll stop anywhere safe to let somebody off or to let somebody on. It's a great part of Canadiana.
Now, this documentary, which is, how long does it run again?
It's 3 hours.
3 hours long, and there's no narration. Once again, we take the journey, and thanks to your computer graphics and other things that we'll talk about, you're able to take this journey and follow it. And I think having seen a preview of the program, I think one of the lovely things is it's not just, as you say, a trip across some incredible scenery. It's a trip that has a lot of history surrounding it.
And that's, I think that's what's so interesting, right? Is you're right. The scenery is one thing, but you're traveling, through towns that are, that have had, interesting history because, when this was originally when this rail was built, it was part of, McDonald's, promise to link the country together. So this is the original CPR line. And what the CPR line did or didn't do. I mean, what towns it passed through, grew economically, and the towns that were hoping that it would pass through, ended up probably disappearing. So this, at one point, this was a thriving route, but it didn't ever. A lot of these towns just didn't get to where they would have, gotten to. They first, became lumber towns, and that was great. So there was some mining, obviously, but after that was done, they didn't go very far. But now they're beautiful, fishing towns. They're beautiful, connected to the Spanish River, one of the great canoeing routes in all of Ontario. And one of the beautiful things is you can get on the train in Sudbury with your canoe. And you can say to the crew, "Look, I want to get to this stop or this stop." So you can judge how high up on the river you want to get to. So I want to do 2 nights, drop me off here. I want to do 3 nights, drop me off here.
Wow.
And you've got all your gear with you. The train stops. It looks like it's in the middle of the wilderness, but there's actually a little trail that kind of cuts through the woods, and there's the start of your train route. And then your canoe route, and then you kind of canoe back down to the bottom of the river. So it's historic. It was it still feels like a piece of history when you're on it.
Yeah. One of the things I didn't realize, but as is pointed out in the program, a good part of the rail line, the bed, is made out of copper and nickel.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's purposely or not purposely, because when they were building the railway, the bed, which you think that the bed would have changed, over 140 years or so. And they were just putting, because they're cutting through a lot of shield, right? So they're dynamiting all of this great granite, and it's coming up and it's mixed with, all of these other, minerals and metals. But what they realized is that same stone, even today, they've tried different ways to create that bed with new materials, different materials. And it's funny, I was in Portugal recently, and they use granite there too. For some reason, granite has enough absorption, but it's durable enough and solid enough that it's the perfect bed for a railway.
I think people will really enjoy the stops along the way. Seeing canoeists unloading their goods and their supplies, and I think in one spot they stop and a barbecue gets loaded onto a little trailer going out into the bush. And because there's really no narration, it's all natural audio, you really get a sense that you're watching real life happening right before you.
And that's, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because that's what we want to do. We want to give people a immersive, train ride, and we put them in a seat that you can't buy, right? I mean, you can't buy the front of the train. So if you're sitting in a traditional seat, you're seeing sort of a 90-degree at best, view of what, of the country you're going by. You never ever get to see the full 180. So here we are at the front of the train. So you get this great view, which is just, you never see that. You never get the chance to do that. And then you get the opportunity to eavesdrop on everybody that sort of kind of comes on and comes off this train. And you were talking about this guy George. So George has a cabin on the, that can only be reached by train. He ordered a barbecue from, the closest big town. The train picks it up. They know where George lives. They stop the train. You can't see his cabin, but they know where he is. So they stop, and George comes out, and they ask him how the fishing's been that day, and give him his barbecue, and off he goes with a brand new barbecue. I mean, it's to think in 2023 that that this sort of still goes on. It's
One of the scenes that really caught my attention was when they made a stop. There was no one there, and they unloaded 3 boxes of live bait, and they just left them right there at the edge of a dusty little track, knowing that someone was going to come and get them.
Yeah. And it's $3 per bait box, by the way, if you want to, you ever want to send worms or minnows on the train.
One of the geographical features, and it was a learning experience for me. There's something called height of land,
Mhm.
and I didn't realize that even existed.
Yeah, and it's not a straight line, right? You would imagine that at some point, it's sort of cut straight. It sort of moves all the way around. But it was really important, traditionally, when during the fur trade, right? Because you've got everything, south of the height of land, moving southbound, and you've got everything, north of the height of land moving northbound. So you could basically, find a route, and they did, where you're not having to paddle, right? I mean, that's the aim. So this we crossed that height of land, and it's part of the reason why the French River too was such an important river, because it also crossed the height of land. But yeah, it's a cool phenomena. You can get from the edge of the height of land all the way to Hudson Bay on a moving with the current.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
To be honest, the camera for a good part of the journey is right at the front of the train. So you're getting an absolutely perfect view. And I think people will find the journey, if I can use the word, mesmerizing. There is nothing like the click-clack of a rail and this scenery that's just coming before you. And the train is moving at a pace that's certainly not a bullet train. It's moving relatively slowly, but it's a mesmerizing journey.
it's a really mesmerizing journey, and it's the first time that we've had to make a film on a working vehicle, right? In the other three, we were able to, sort of charter our own, boat, sailboat. On this one, it's a working train. Like, we have no control over, how fast or slow it goes, where it's going to stop. But the lucky thing for us is, because it's a bud car or a bud train, it doesn't move that quickly. But even if it did have the ability to go faster than the 80 miles an hour it can go, the route itself is so twisting and turning that it rarely gets up to to any kind of high speed. So for the viewer, it's a really comfortable speed to move at. You really feel like, as you said, it's sort of, it's mesmerizing.
And on the journey, um, you move by the lakes and the forest. And at one point, and I should add here that the graphic descriptions, every so often up comes a historical fact or a geographical fact, and that really, really helps the journey. I was absolutely fascinated with the segment on school cars.
Mm.
I didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't know there was such a thing either. And there's a woman named Bonnie Setter who has written a book about school cars. She's wonderful. She finds stories about Canadian history that's sort of forgotten. And she got in touch and told us about these school cars. And we said, tell us more, tell us more. She sent me her book. I read her book and I thought, this, who would have ever thought about this? So, in the 1930s, the Ontario Ministry of Education decided that, remote communities along rail lines, and these were really, really remote communities that didn't have any schools, not even, one room schoolhouses. Those children needed to be taught. It was their mandate as a ministry to make sure that all Ontarians were taught. So they figured out that the best way to do this is to get themselves a CPR car, retrofit it, so that the front of the car was a classroom. It could hold up to 20 students. And the back of the car was a living quarters for the teacher. So the car that we recreated in 3D graphics, which took a really, really long time because we wanted to be absolutely true to this car. It took one person almost 2 months to build this animated car, and it's absolutely perfect. And then we found a film that was done on this rail car, and so we get to see the inside, and you get to see the students working and stuff. And this one family, he was the school teacher. His wife also did some teaching in the evenings with the adults, but they were on this school car for 40 years. They raised 4 kids. But imagine 40 years living out of a back of a train car.
And seeing Bill Wright and his family in those old photos, it was really engaging and a beautiful piece of history that people will find quite fascinating. I'm sure. Just an unknown part of Canadian and Ontario history that most of us never knew about.
Yeah, and they apparently had a dental car as well, and that dental car I think would see up to 2,000 people a year.
Wow!
And it would go, yeah. I mean, I think that in those days they were getting to these remote communities, and the best way to do it is was by rail.
One of the stops en route is at Chapleau, and that's a perfect stopping point because it's the gateway to a huge game reserve.
The largest in the world. And who would have thought it was here? Mike, there's another one. I didn't know that. I would, if you asked me where the largest game reserve in the world was, I'd probably point to, the continent of Africa. I wouldn't think it's here in Canada. Yeah. And it was done in the 1930s. And it was a way because at that point, trapping and poaching was completely out of control. And the Ontario government looked at it, realized that if it continued, species in that area would get wiped out. And they were trying to figure out a way to resolve that. And they had the foresight to create this, this massive game preserve. And it succeeded. I mean, most species bounce back well. And it's on this route. So when you're traveling along the train on the right-hand side for an hour and a half is this game preserve.
One of the interesting parts of the program that people really enjoy is that you got approval to do the job last June, and then you did a lot of filming, of course, during the summer and into the fall. But there's a good piece on the winter footage as well. And I found myself thinking, oh my goodness, how bleak it looks at that time of year. And you come to realize what a lifeline that railway is.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. That's when we realized that if this isn't there in the wintertime, like, I mean, it really gives you that sense of remoteness. And the other thing that was really cool about the winter and what we wanted to do in the winter is we wanted to, shoot because the camera's mounted at the front of the train in the exact same position. And we just thought it would be really interesting to seamlessly go from summertime without the viewer expecting anything to all of a sudden, because it's like a perfect match, edit, right? You go right into wintertime. And one of the things that we found in the winter too is that very few people ride the train. And we thought that, we would get a really beautiful sunny day because that would be perfect. And we shot on a snowy day, which we thought we'd never use, and we shot on a sunny day. And the winter day was the winter snowy day was so much more beautiful in a way. And the snow, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was so cold that it didn't bother the lens at all. So like you see the snowstorm as you're going along in the winter, and it was way more beautiful than a perfectly blue sunny day, because a perfectly blue sunny day just looks like a summer day with white. A snowy day, you see all the snow in the trees. They're still hanging on the branches. It's coming down at the lens. I mean, it was really dramatic. It really caught us by surprise that would be the footage that we were going to use.
One of the pieces that you touch on, and I did know this, but I had forgotten it, that there was once upon a time a serviceman who got a bear cub from White River, and that bear cub ended in the London Zoo and ended up being the catalyst for a world famous series of books.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. Again, it's so fun to do these because you learn things that you just never knew about. I always thought that Winnie the Pooh was from Winnipeg. I mean, that's where Winnie came from, right? Winnie was, because this soldier had found it in Winnipeg. But no, Winnie the Pooh, the black bear that the stories were based on, was found in White River, which is the end of this journey. And they have every summer they have a big, Winnie the Pooh festival up there. And the other thing I didn't know about Winnie the Pooh is she was a female. I always thought that, the original black bear was a male bear. But the bear was, found in White River. Yes, it eventually did get to Winnipeg and then did get to London, England, and then did, be seen by A.A. Milne and his son, Christopher Robin. And Christopher Robin loved the bear. And A.A. was, inspired to write, arguably the most famous children's book series in the world.
I think you're right. The photography from the train is absolutely beautiful. But you also have done a good deal of photography from the air. And interestingly, you didn't use a drone this time. You actually used a helicopter instead of a drone.
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out because that was a real challenge for us. Drone photography now has basically taken over. I mean, nobody uses helicopters. In the early 2000s, that's all we used was helicopters, but it's just so incredibly expensive. Where a drone, is at maybe a tenth of the cost. The challenge on this one was that it's so remote and the train is on its schedule. So it's not like you can, have the train go by and say, okay, stop there. And, we'll go up another 200 miles and then, come by the camera again. So it's doing what it's going to do. And, you can't get to this rail track. There's no roads and, huge swaths of it. You can't get to it. So we had no choice but to use a helicopter. And it kind of brought back the old days, right? To be in a helicopter, except the technology in the old days, you'd take the door off and you'd seatbelt the camera guy in and, you'd shoot out the door and there was no gyro and it was, kind of shaky. Now we've got this incredible setup with a like a big camera that we can work, remotely inside the cockpit with, and it's got stabilization and, so anyway, we had no choice but to use a helicopter. And it's the footage is it's sort of epic, right? There's something bigger about it, right? Because you can follow the train for, for 50 miles, right? With a drone, maybe you might get a kilometer out of it, right? So yeah, the shots are really big. And John Morrison, our director, he said that that was one of his most thrilling, directing days in his career. He thought it was just because it's such beautiful country, right? And you're following this, this cool old fashioned train. And yeah, there was something really rewarding about that.
We should touch on just for a moment about your production team. It's not a huge crew. It's a tight group of people, but a very diverse group of talents that exist in your production team. It must give you a great feeling to know that you're surrounded by such a tremendous group of professionals.
Yeah, no, I mean they're great, right? I mean, Andrea runs the business. John's, I mean, his background is sports, live sports, directing. So for him to come in and do these programs, he and I just, we just love working together. I mean, it's so much fun. And he takes care of the big camera. I take care of, in this case, the whistle stops or the flag stops. And yeah, it's really fun. I mean, working at a radio station, right? I mean, it's collaborative, right? And it's fun. And when it works, it's working. And when it doesn't, you really know it isn't working. So you hope for more good days than bad days. But I guess that's true in every business, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, when you have those difficult days, you have to rethink, how are we going to get this done? So there's always a good bit of that as well. But the team has done a tremendous job, and I would, as we're closing, I'd just like to tell people there's a pacing to the whole thing that really a lot of care has gone into it. It's not just a long 3-hour train ride. There's so much else to be involved with in terms of the history, the geography, the information that you provide, the computer graphics, the helicopter footage. It really is a beautifully paced production, and you must be very proud of it.
Well, thank you. And it, when I hear that, I think that's really nice because we do take a lot of time to pace things out. So to hear that from someone like you, and I don't, I'm not just saying this to, it takes a lot more than it appears, right? So it's nice when somebody appreciates that. So thanks.
I think people are going to love this show. It's the other shows in the series have been very popular, and obviously TVO is delighted with the interest that people have taken in them. And I think this train journey is going to be exactly the same sort of thing. I heartily recommend everybody to pick it up on the 7th of April on TVO and TVO.org and TVO YouTube. 7 o'clock on the 7th. That's a Friday night. And Mitch, I can't thank you enough for joining us again. It's lovely to chat with you. It's always fun to see what mischief you and your team have been up to.
Thank you, and I really hope that that your listeners get up to Sudbury and take this trip, because it's really one of the great train trips in Canada, maybe in the world. It's a really great train trip.
Somebody might stop and give you a pie. You never know. Mitch, thanks for joining us today. This has been delightful.
Thanks, Mike. Have a great day.